All right, everyone, welcome to Teaching with Cultural Care. My name is Bailey.
I'm Sandy.
And I'm Jess.
And this is a podcast where we talk about controversial topics, and then we also try to introduce different books that you can use in your classrooms to talk about these topics.
And today's topic is about violence in schools and communities. As we're filming this, we're just a few days out from a horrific shooting in New Zealand, in the New Zealand mosques. So we wanted to talk about ways that we can discuss these topics with our students.
So, like Jess mentioned, there was recently 2 shootings at New Zealand mosques, and what had happened is 2 people had went into the mosque with the intent of killing the people that were attending services, and the last time that I had checked, there were 49 lives lost during that event, and it definitely had a lot of news coverage, especially since one of the shooters was actually live streaming it through his Facebook. So basically what this did is it kind of opened a window for anyone to be able to see what was going on and witness some of the gruesome killings that had happened during that shooting. And while it was in New Zealand, which is pretty far away from where we are, kind of just to bring it back on a more local level, one of the more recent shootings or events that we had was actually on February 14th. And it was at Cleveland High School in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And what had happened is a student had gone to school that day with the intent of killing his ex-girlfriend and then himself. But luckily he was caught. He was only able to get 1 shot off of his gun, and he was caught before there were any injuries. So that was definitely one of the less scary events. But we want to make sure that we are addressing this topic in the classroom, especially since depending on the community that you're living in, for some students it's a matter of when is a school shooting going to happen as opposed to whether the school shooting is going to happen.
Mm-hmm. And this is definitely a topic that's on students' minds. Even if they are not personally affected by violence in their communities, there's enough media coverage and enough conversation about it that our students are definitely thinking about school shootings for sure, and also other mass shootings in our country.
Okay, so now we wanted to talk about some books that you can incorporate into your classrooms to try to touch on these tricky topics with your students. One thing that we talked about is the types of books that you're using. You kind of want to differentiate depending on what's developmentally appropriate for your students. So, for example, I am planning on teaching elementary education, so I would do more books that focus on grief and loss so that it's not gruesome and it's not scaring the kids. Instead, it's touching on the topic in a different way. So one book that I found, which I thought was a really good book, it's called Come With Me by Holly McGhee, and it's about a little girl who is seeing all of this awful stuff in the news and is just not very happy with it and is kind of scared. And so she goes to her parents and is like, what can I do to make the world a better place? Which is a great thing that you want to talk about, especially with younger kids. You want to get them into the groove of being a good citizen. And so this book just kind of touches on different ways you can help out in your community and just be a good person in general. And then another resource that I found is called booksforlittles.com. We'll include it in the information below. And this is a website that talks or gives you different topics, again, tricky topics like what we talk about. And it will show you different books that you can use in the classroom that touch on the specific topics. And that I thought was a really good resource because, again, for our topic of shootings and stuff in the media, it talked about how hitting on grief and loss can help, or even hitting on fear. And some of the books that it used just hit on, I'm afraid of the dark, but that can be translated any way that you need it to.
Yeah, and then some of the examples for books at the secondary level. The first one that we found is called This Is Where It Ends by Nijkamp. And it's a fictional book that tells about multiple perspectives of students that were attending a school where a school shooting had happened. Because it's a work of fiction, I think it's a really good way to just kind of get the students interested in the book. and then be able to discuss what the plot of the story is and kind of help them like process it. Because like Bailey said, we're not trying to foster fear, but it is an important topic that does need to be discussed, and reading about it and discussing it with your classmates is a good way to go about it. Another book that we found was called Damage Done by Amanda Panitch, and it's another work of fiction, and it's about a girl who witnessed her brother shoot her best friend and 9 others at a school shooting. This one has a more personal perspective, but again, it'll help you with discussing emotions and how to process it. And this one has a different point of view, since this is the story of a girl who knew the shooter personally because it was her brother.
Another great resource to look at is the Cooperative Children's Book Center. This is a library that studies children's books, or books for kids and young adults. And they put together every year a list of books that they recommend about various topics. They've also got bibliographies for specific issues. For example, one book list that might be relevant for this topic is they have 50 books for children about grief and loss. And that might be a good way to help students process what they're experiencing. Even if they are not part of school shootings, they might be feeling grief and loss about seeing these things in the news. So the CCBC has a lot of great book lists that will be really helpful.
All right, everybody, thank you for joining us. Again, we are going to include all of the links to the resources we provided today down in our bio. Again, my name's Bailey.
I'm Sandy.
And I'm Jess.
And this is Teaching with Cultural Care.